I feel like the guys that had to go up after the Beatles the first time they were on TV. All the exciting stuff has already happened, and now everybody wants to go home, but they have to still listen to me. So, sorry, you're going to have to hang out for a little while longer. I wanted to start with a story which actually happened 30 years ago next month. It was February of 1990. And I was living in Southern California, and at the time, our family business required my parents and I to go back and forth between the Philippines and here. And my mom at the time was in the Philippines, and she wrote me a letter, which arrived at my house in Riverside, California, in February of 1990. And it started like this. It said, "Dear Dos," because Dos is my nickname. That's another long story you don't want to know. But she said, "Dear Dos," and the first line was, "I have met the girl of your dreams." Now, I was 24 at the time, 23, and I'm thinking, no, no, you haven't. You have no idea what my dreams are. But this is her letter to me, and she goes on through the letter, and she starts telling me about this girl. She says, "You remember we were at church, and there was this girl, and she was singing. Well, I met her, and she was telling me all these things about her." And I thought, okay, that's nice. At the end, she says, "You have to come here right away to meet her." And no. And then 2 weeks later, another letter comes telling me more about this girl. And 2 weeks later, another letter comes. And then a phone call. And this is back in the days when all of the phones were like locked to the wall. So it wasn't like I was walking around and there's a phone. Every time I got home, there's a message from my mom, and she's on an answering machine. Anybody remember answering machine? Okay. So I'm dating myself here. Anyway, so she kept telling me all of these things about this girl that I had to go and meet her. And I kept rolling my eyes. I did what anybody would expect. Yeah, sure, Mom, whatever. And none of the things that she said clicked. None of the things mattered, no matter what she told me about her. It was just something I was reading. It was interesting, but wasn't really anything that really stuck with me. And then, eventually, I ended up going to the Philippines because I had to go for work, and it was July. And I went there. And it was funny because I got to the airport and they took me right from the airport to get my hair done and my nails done because, you know, that's what you do when you're there. And then that afternoon, I met her. And everything completely changed when I met her. Because for the last 5 months, I'd been getting information about her. I knew everything about her. I knew where she was born. I knew how old she was. I knew, where she went to elementary school, where she went to high school, where she went to college. I knew that she was living in New Jersey for a while, and then didn't like it there because no one likes New Jersey. Sorry if you go to live in New Jersey. But no, so she went back to the Philippines. I knew all of the details of who she was, but I didn't know her. When I finally got to be in her presence, when I finally got to meet her, it changed everything. And it changed everything to the extent that 11 days later, we were engaged to be married. And she has regretted it every day since. This is something that you and I know instinctively. Knowing about someone is not the same as knowing someone. That you can know all about a person, you can know all of the information, but you don't really know that person. And so here at MP Church, we are coming right out of this year of growth, and we are dovetailing right into this year of knowledge. And last week, Pastor Max took us through, and he said, this year, in this year of knowledge, one of the questions that he said that we have to answer is, do we know that God exists? Does he exist in our lives? And how do we know that? Because for me, my mother could have been faking those letters, right? She could have been telling me all of these wonderful things about this person, but then when I meet her, she's a different person. It really isn't until you have that personal encounter that you can tell whether or not the information that you got, the things that you've been told, the things that you've read, are actually real. And part of our challenge is that in the culture that we live in today, it's hard to get to that place of knowing. Have you ever had to fight with a computer? Like your car payment, you send your car payment in, and then a couple of days later you get a notice that says, we didn't receive your car payment. And so you see that this computer somewhere generated this notice that says that they didn't receive your payment. So what do? You call them up, and when you get on the phone, instead of talking to another person, you're talking to another computer. And you try to talk to somebody, but you don't get anybody. And so after trying to press the right buttons to get to a particular place, you just give up and you hang up and you just say, okay, I don't know what to do. And then a few days later, another computer sends you another notice because you can't fight the computers. And you just think to yourself, I wish that there was somebody that I can talk to. It used to be that your family would move into a house and you would stay there forever. You got to know your neighbors. The people who lived around you were the same people that lived around you for almost your entire life. I remember when I was growing up that I knew the neighbor to the left, I knew the neighbor to the right, I knew the couple across the street, I knew not to go into the yard of the lady next to them. I knew everybody who lived on my street because once you moved in, you stayed. But today it's completely different. We don't see our neighbors anymore. In fact, it used to be that you didn't see your neighbors because you drove your car straight into your garage and then you just walked in and no one ever saw you. But today, everybody's garage is an in-law apartment, right? So where does everybody park? They park on the driveway, they park on the street, and you still don't talk to your neighbors because they get out of their car and they walk straight into their homes. It used to be that when you went to work for a company, you would go and work for that company for 20, 30 years. That the people you work with were the people that became your friends. They became your family. Your kids grew up together. But today, it's different. We don't do that anymore. People go from job to job. And what has ended up happening is that people or companies now tend to look at us as commodities instead of people. As we go out and they try to find the best person at the cheapest price for the job, we suddenly become part of an equation instead of part of a relationship. And as the world around us starts to treat us more like an object, we long for something personal. We long to get to know people. That it's not enough to just have information, but you've got to know them. Sociologists tell us that the more advanced technologically that we are, the more that we yearn for the personal. In other words, the more we become high tech, the more that we need high touch. And you've lived this, especially if you are out there on social media, that you have so many friends on Facebook and so many followers on Instagram, but it doesn't feel like your lives are any more fulfilled with friendships, that we still long for that it's still something we struggle with. So throughout the scriptures, and especially in some of the passages that we're going to look at today, we're going to see that the solution to this problem of us being less connected to each other is actually becoming personally known and connected to God. Now, I know that might seem strange, so you're going to have to hang with me for a second because it might seem to you like I don't understand how a connection with God is going to help me with a connection with other people. But if you look at what the essence is of when we hear and read about the people who've had encounters with God, the interesting thing is this. When you look at the great prayers of the Bible, the prayers that we repeat, the prayers that we memorize, the prayers that we say, wow, that was amazing. If you look at those prayers, none of those prayers are asking for blessings. None of those prayers are asking for healing. None of those prayers are asking for provision or for comfort or protection. If you look at the great prayers of Scripture, they're all asking one thing. God, I want to know you. I want to know who you are. Because personal knowledge of the Father is everything. In fact, personal knowledge of the Father is the essence of what it means to become a Christian, to be a Christian. And in the passage that we're going to look at today, that is what we're going to be talking about, is the fact that we have to know that there has to be a personal relationship. It's really cool to me that the connection groups that are starting are going to be talking about the book of John, because John is an amazing book. Now, John was one of Jesus' apostles. John spent 3 years of his life living life with Jesus. He knew him better than anyone else could have possibly known him. And throughout his life, if you can imagine that everywhere he went, that John would encounter people and they would want to know about Jesus. They would say, tell me about Jesus. Tell me a story about Jesus. So his entire life, he's talking to people and he's telling them about Jesus. And at the end of his life, he's an old man already. And he's seen almost all of his friends killed because of their faith. And he's looking back and he's reflecting on it. And I think he's saying to himself, listen, all of these people who've been asking me about Jesus, I'm nearing the end of my time here. How can I let the people continue to hear about what I experienced with Jesus? And so at the end of his life, he stopped and he decided to write down everything that he remembered. And in telling us about this understanding or this desire that we should have of knowing the Father, he writes this, and we're in John 14:5. And if you want to follow along, but I think we're going to have the verses up on the screens. But in John 14:5, he's talking to his disciples. And Thomas, one of his disciples, asks him this. He says, so how can we know the way? In other words, there's so many things going on in the world, so many different people who are trying to tell us different things that we have to do. How can we know the way? And Jesus says this. Jesus told him, I am the way. See, how can we know the way? Listen, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. And many people, I think, struggle with this. In fact, one of the greatest criticisms of Christianity is that it is so exclusive. That, come on, how can it be that the only way to get to the Father is through Jesus? That seems too much. Think of all of the people in the world who are doing good things, who are living good lives, but they just don't acknowledge Jesus. How can we possibly say that the only way to the Father is through Jesus? Well, it wouldn't make sense if the only way was about doing something. The reason that it makes sense is because the only way is through a relationship. You have to have a relationship with Jesus in order to get to know and have a relationship with the Father. And we know this, right? Because when we want to have a relationship with somebody, we don't go directly to the person if we know that there's someone that we know in common. So we will go to somebody that we know and we'll say, hey, can you introduce me? Is there a way that I can get to this relationship? Is there some way that you can introduce me to that person? Because we can't just jump in front of a person and say, I want to meet you, I want us to be friends. Because you'd freak out. Right? If you were walking along, if you were at the mall and someone walks up to you and says, listen, I really want to be friends with you. We'd go, okay. All right? That's not how it works. And it's the same here. And this is what John is telling us that Jesus was saying. He said, listen, it's not about doing good. Doing good is great, but that's not how you get to the Father. You get to the Father and have a relationship with him by having a relationship with his Son. He goes on and he says, if you had really known me, you would know who my Father is. From now on, you do know him and you have seen him. Now that word seen is the English word, and we use that word seen, but actually it's translated two different ways into the Greek. The first way is the word vlepo, which means to see, like using our eyes and biologically seeing somebody. But the second way that seen is translated is the word horapo, which means to understand, which means to know someone. And he says, listen, if you know me, if you have seen me, if you understand who I am, then you have seen, you understand, you know who the Father is. And so now he talks to Philip and he says, Philip said, Lord, show us the Father and we will be satisfied. Lord, we want to velepo. We want to not see, but we want to understand who the Father is. And it says, Jesus replied, have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? He's saying, we spent all this time together and you still don't know me? And listen to what Jesus is saying, because I think he would be saying that to many of us today. See, he's saying, listen, you can be with somebody for a long, long time. You can be doing good work here in the church. You can be busying yourself with Christian activities. You can be feeding the hungry. You can be healing the sick. You can be giving to the poor and completely miss the entire point of being a follower of Jesus. You can completely miss it. Doing all of the things that we think that we're supposed to be doing. Because that was Philip. Philip was doing all of the things. Listen, Philip was standing side by side with Jesus, and he still missed the point. Because there's a distinction between knowing about someone and knowing someone. See, when you first get down to meet someone, when you meet someone and you first start to know them, the first thing that you do is you gather information, right? That's the very first thing. When you're introduced to somebody, what do? Well, you start with my name and where I'm from and where I work, what do I do, where do I live, right? The first things that we do when we're talking to somebody and meeting someone new is we gather information. It's the first part of any relationship. The second thing that you do is you get to this place of intimacy where you stop the statements about this is where I live and this is where I went to school, and you start going to the questions of how is your life? How do you feel? What do you think about this? What part of your childhood has affected you? What are the things that you yearn for? What are the things that bring you happiness in your life? The things that are deeper than just where do you live and where are you from? And when you get to that level of personal disclosure, it requires a commitment. Right? It requires a commitment on your part, because not only are you spending time with that person in asking and answering these questions, but you're also expending emotional energy. Because I can know where you went to school, but when I start hearing about the tragedies in your life, the challenges that you face, the things that you've gone through, I become emotionally invested in you the same way that you become emotionally invested in me. And it's when you get to that level of commitment, when you get to that level of disclosure, of interest in the other person, that's when you get to the understanding, to the seeing, to the horapo, to the knowing. But you have to go from information to intimacy. You can get information without intimacy, but you can't get to intimacy without the information first. Listen to what I'm saying. You can get to information without any intimacy. I can find out all these things about you. I can Google you. I'm not gonna, but I'm saying I can. I can find out a whole bunch of things by talking to your friends and your family members and never become intimate with you. But you can never get to the place of intimacy without the information.